Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jasenia Rodriguez, and I will be presenting Atlantis, Myth or Manipulation. This project was created for my humanities course with Professor Garman, and I worked on it with these lovely group members here. In the 21st century, when we hear of Atlantis, we typically think of an underwater city full of adventure, action, and even fun. We think of movies such as Aquaman, Hotel Transylvania, and of course, Disney's own film series titled Atlantis. However, before television and the creation of these movies, Atlantis was not known in such a glamorous light. There is a darker side to the myth of Atlantis, one full of manipulation. The myth of Atlantis has been used as both allegory and propaganda. At various times, it has been used to assert political ideals, promote ancestry, or justify racial superiority. So, what is the myth of Atlantis? Atlantis, which means of Atlas, is said to be an island situated in front of Pillars of Heracles that flanked the entrance to the Strait of Gibraltar and were considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. Atlantis was said to be a massively powerful empire with a strong army. It was, allegedly, huge, the size of Africa and Asia combined. It was protected by the god Poseidon, who crowned his son Atlas king. The origin of this myth comes from ancient Greece, specifically from Greek philosopher Plato in 360 BC, where the first written record of Atlantis comes from. In this, Plato described the city in his two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. It was written as part of an unfinished trilogy. In his dialogues, Plato describes Atlantis as a powerful and advanced kingdom that sank into the ocean around 9600 BC in a single day and night. Atlantis also had a constitution that was suspiciously similar to the one outlined in Plato's Republic. A key point that Plato emphasizes is that as the Atlanteans grew more powerful, their ethics declined. Even though their armies eventually conquered Africa as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Tyrrhenia, they are eventually driven back by the Athenian-led alliance. Later, by way of divine punishment for their arrogance and their debauchery, the island was beset by earthquakes and floods and sank into a muddy sea. While the Atlantis myth has been recognized by most modern Platonists as an allegory, no consensus has been reached on the allegory's precise purpose. Though critics have some theories, they conjecture that Plato recounts this tale of Atlantis with the intent to promote his ideas of an ideal society as explained in the Republic. Moreover, by using stories of the rise and fall of a great empire and comparing them to more recent events such as the Trojan War or Athens' disastrous invasion of Sicily in 413 BC, he draws parallels to what a society looks like when it loses his way, something Plato was very concerned with in his own time in Athens. In the dialogues, Plato's Critias plays a game of ancient operator, saying he heard the story of Atlantis from his grandfather, who had heard it from the Athenian statesman Solomon, 300 years before Plato's time, who had learned it from an Egyptian priest, who said it had happened 9,000 years before that. This underscores that this story, even in Plato's time, is believed to be a myth. However, no matter what people believed, from that point on, many nations have manipulated Plato's telling of Atlantis. First and foremost, we have the story of the Welsh Indians. This was a legend that lasted centuries and attempted to link the Native American culture to Welsh origins through a fictional Welsh prince named Madoc. Madoc is said to have been a seafarer who colonized an island paradise, believed to be the lost Atlantis, and encountered Welsh-speaking Indians on this island. This specific tale is considered fiction. However, around the year 1580, Welshman John Dee revived the legend to claim that Madoc's island paradise was, in fact, America, and Madoc had actually discovered America long before the Spaniards did. This legend contributed greatly to the assumption that real Native Americans were too backward to progress on their own, hence how they must have been of Welsh origin, despite even speaking a different language. The manipulation of the legend affected multiple tribes, especially the Mandan people of North Dakota. Even over 100 years later, George Catlin, an artist, claimed the Mandan people to be as light as half-breeds, as they were supposed descendants of Welsh. This was due to reports of blonde-haired Mandans that were most likely misinterpretations of achromotrichia, premature hair whitening. All in all, the Welsh have taken the myth of Atlantis too far in their attempts to claim America as their very own discovery. Next, Sir Francis Bacon of Great Britain wrote New Atlantis, which came out after he died in 1627. In his writing, he identified the Atlanteans as indigenous Mexicans. As the myth goes, Atlantis was destroyed in battle. Twisting the ending of this myth, he wrote that the indigenous Mexicans were survivors of this destruction, which would explain why they were so, quote, uncivilized and out of order. The discovery of the Americas, especially of the strange, isolated civilization of Mexico, had aroused speculation. Bacon's belief that America was the wreck of the submerged Atlantis was shared by many in his age. How else could Europe justify their view of Mexicans as purely savage communities when confronted with the very intricate and advanced yet declining civilization they encountered there? The Nazis were the next to use the story of Atlantis as propaganda to promote their supposed racial superiority. The Nazis put forth the theory that the Aryans, an Indo-European tribe that resided in Eurasia, were direct descendants of the lost people of Atlantis. According to this story, these Aryans spread their culture worldwide before Atlantis sank. The Nazis believed these Aryans were the ancestors of the Germanic people, and Hitler wanted to provide evidence of this to the world. Thus, their quest for historical and archaeological evidence to support their claims began. House Atlantis was built in 1931 to represent a temple in Bremen, Germany. It was a headquarters for studying the Aryan master race. Hermann Wirth, a Nazi and scholar of ancient religions and symbols, believed that Atlantis was real and theorized that the Aryans sought a higher altitude to avoid the sea after Atlantis sank, and that their descendants had ended up in Tibet. Heinrich Himmler, also obsessed with the history of Atlantis, set out to prove Wirth's theory. He co-founded an SS research team called Abernethy with Wirth, which included archaeologists and scientists who would search for archaeological proof. Himmler theorized that the Aryans made their way to Tibet to preserve their traditions and isolate themselves from the world. Throughout the Tibet expedition, the team conducted excavations in several regions. Their goal was to find ancient specimens, which they could then compare with the facial features of the local population. The research team also found ethnographic artifacts and took photographs as evidence. Moreover, as they did all over the world, they appropriated many of the country's treasures, all of which they shipped back to Germany. However, the expedition did not find any evidence to support Himmler's theory that Aryans had settled in Tibet. After the war, they put the collection into museums and archives in the United States and Germany. The Nazi Party accepted the Atlantean myth because, after Germany's defeat in World War I, their economy and hope were shattered. They were willing to believe anything, even if it was a myth, to bolster their country's floundering image. This is why they were taken in by Adolf Hitler's propaganda. The results of this propaganda campaign were catastrophic. The Nazis, who believed in the racial superiority of the Aryan race, caused the deaths of millions of people. The Holocaust, a horrific event that took place from 1933 to 1945, was a systematic, state-sponsored persecution and genocide carried out by the Nazis. It targeted several groups including Jews, Romani people, the disabled, homosexuals, and those with political ideologies that opposed the Nazi regime and who did not fit their Aryan ideal. However, it is important to clarify that the Holocaust was not created by the Atlantean myth. It was a result of the destructive policies and ideologies of Hitler and the Nazi regime. So, as we can see, people have exploited the myth of Atlantis by using it for their own immoral personal gains for centuries. In modern times, the perception of Atlantis has shifted to a more positive light, more like the myth that it originally was. It is no longer used for power and discrimination, mainly because it is known that it is in fact a myth. This latter use of Atlantis is seen on television today. In Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, the last movie of the franchise, the lost city features its modern technology and a strong army. In Hotel Transylvania 3, the characters went on a vacation to the city of Atlantis. It was seen as a fun destination spot containing a casino. In the movie Aquaman, Aquaman himself is trying to win the throne to the multi-kingdom Atlantis. There are many other examples of movies and shows that use Atlantis in their storylines. They use it to tap into human fascination with adventure, mystery, and the unknown, capturing the inspiring idea of exploration. Myths also allow people to indulge in their own imagination and the adventurous side of themselves. Throughout history, the interpretation of the myth of Atlantis has significantly evolved. It transitioned from being an allegory to being used as a tool for propaganda and discrimination. Eventually, it reverted back to its original form and is now told as the story that it was intended to be. For the sources that we used, thank you very much for listening.